tomorrow.
This is what was happening in Brussels earlier this morning. Latest demonstrations, emergency sirens, water cannon had been deployed to the streets. Why? Well, the farmers were revolting once again. They were demonstrating. They had put tractors right across roadways. They were using all sorts of musical devices to try and cause a hazard. Why? There's a meeting of the EU Agriculture Group today. The latest meeting of ministers looking after such things, and farmers, by and large, across the EU are not happy. Let's try and understand why that is the case. Andrew Meredith is the editor of Farmers Weekly and joins us on a Zoom call right now. What is the complaint of the EU farming community, Andrew?
Good morning. I think it's a confluence of things. To pick on one thing in particular is probably a little bit unhelpful, but in the round, it is the costs being imposed on their business by having to comply with environmental policies. It's the change in the subsidy structure to try and reward that and take money away from area payments or supporting food production directly. And that leaves farmers feeling really squeezed in a global marketplace where buyers, if there is plenty washing around the world, can go to another part of the world and buy food cheaper, where perhaps some of those rules are not in existence or not being enforced in the same way.
Many flaws to the common agricultural policy. I remember reporting on that multitude of times, and that's one thing, of course, that now the UK doesn't have to worry about, being outside the EU. Is it still that same old CAP that is the complaint here, or has that now been modified by Europe?
Well, it's a devolved issue, so you have to look at every country in turn. But if you want to just look briefly at England, we are seeing the most rapid transformation here. They're furthest down the road in developing their post-CAP policy. It's called the Environmental Land Management Scheme. And at its heart is this idea to make environmental goods and services part of a marketplace that the government runs, and they provide this menu of options to farmers that farmers can pick and choose from, and what they're going to choose to deliver for the government, for the environment, and they get paid for that. But what they don't get is that area payment they got under the European scheme, which had its flaws, as you say. It distributed the most wealth to the largest and often the wealthiest farmers, but it did provide a safety net in those more difficult years to many by, helping them to minimize the volatility suffered by their businesses when those payments went up and down. They still had that check coming in every December to help keep the lights on. And so a farmer that got 40,000 3 or 4 years ago will have got 25,000 now in their bank account last December, as they get phased out here in England.
All right.
And they're going to be completely gone by 2028.
We were reporting actually on the Minette Batter speech, which was quite combative for an outgoing president, wasn't it, at the Farming Union Conference, which the Prime Minister went to speak to. So we've got that domestic issue. I mean, one of the quotes I heard that day was that farmers in the UK are now being paid to grow flowers rather than grow food, and here we are importing food from the continent. I mean, is that a trite example, or is that actually literally what's happening?
I think that's been an eye-catching example because there are some generous payment rates for that. But there are other actions, what farmers are calling sort of hedge-to-hedge actions, which they can take place in their whole field, which are zero volatility. You're guaranteed that payment. And the payment is actually at a higher rate than for an arable farmer than nearly every crop they can grow, apart from the most profitable one, which is wheat, which we get our, obviously, bread and biscuit flour from.
Right.
And so when that happens, obviously you are creating a choice for a farmer as to whether to continue with food production or whether to go over to environmental goods and services. And I think what has surprised some people is the journey we've been on with DEFRA. 2 or 3 years ago, everyone was slamming them. That's the Department for Environment, the agency responsible for this. 2 or 3 years ago, we were all busy criticising them for not being generous enough. Now the pendulum has swung, and people are saying, "Hang on a minute, that payment rate is so good that I'm going to phase down my food production here and choose to do something else." And it's for the taxpayer to decide, I suppose, as well as the farmer, whether that represents value for money. But that is the debate that's live at the moment.
Yeah.
I think the best case scenario is we see food production flatline and we're likely to see it dip a little bit, I think.
Okay, making food in your own country seems to be a fairly basic idea, doesn't it? But that actually is, I mean, I heard a French example over the weekend, just to widen this out to the European scene again. Is it the case that more and more French farmers are giving up, for instance, on beef production? Having a beef herd is an expensive enterprise, and you can't now get the money, or you can't sell your domestic beef at a competitive price because French people can buy, or the supermarkets can buy beef in from almost anywhere in the world?
The capital cost of maintaining or growing a business gets higher and higher and higher. We've all had the cost of living crisis. We know what it costs to run a household. The amount of money you need to deploy to running farming business with agri-inflation over the last 2 or 3 years has gone up enormously. So what's happening is when farmers get to that point where they need to invest in their business just to stand still, say buy a new tractor, change their dairy parlour, those costs are becoming more and more prohibitive and higher risk. If they've got to go to the bank, interest rates up, higher cost of materials, they are thinking it's not as easy a decision as to whether to carry on as it was before. And some of them are concluding that they are either going to have to get big or get out. And of course, so some are getting out. And so that is another barrier to maintaining the number of farms on the land, the number of farmers, as well as maintaining food production as well.
Do you think they will have any influence on the meeting today? Are there any particular decisions you anticipate coming out of that EU meeting?
Well, what we have seen is at a state-by-state level, obviously, some softening in the language. We've seen some concessions in France, and we have seen, I think, from the EU Commissioner, a choice to, I think, either delay or repeal some of those decisions around which chemicals are permitted for food production, as well as some of those herbicides, I think, or fungicides that may have been under threat before. So I think at the very least, they know that they need to show the farmers a bit of love in their tone, which has been perhaps too adventurous, wanting to progress too fast with environmental change for farmers' appetites. So we'll have to wait and see on the detail, but I think they will have got the message loud and clear that they will need to at least communicate better what they want to do and why they want to do it and how they're going to help farmers with that transition. And that's just as true here in the UK as it is on the continent.
Andrew Meredith, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Andrew is editor of Farmers Weekly, editor of Farmers Weekly, editor of Farmers Weekly, editor of Farmers Weekly, editor of Farmers Weekly.